Hey there, I'm Joe Sligel, and today I wanted to talk to you about the importance of breadcrumbs. I'm going to do that in the context of data migrations, but then also apply it to talk about how it applies to life. So, who am I? I'm kind of a kitchen sink consultant in the marketing world. I deal with a lot of sales, marketing, customer service data and initiatives. But the truth is, I work with all types of data an organization has, integrating it, dashboarding on it, reporting on it, analyzing it, feeding it into strategic planning initiatives. So when I'm dealing with this data, I rely on some fundamentals, and one of them is the importance of breadcrumbs. And I call these fundamentals in business and in life because a lot of the things in business translate to life, my Joeisms. And as I just said, one of them is the importance of breadcrumbs. So let me tell you a little bit about that. So I thought the best way to describe the importance of breadcrumbs would be to first tell you about the call that inspired me to record this video. And then second, talk a little bit about what breadcrumbs are. And then I want to talk about how that business lesson translates to life. So here's a little behind the video, like behind the music, as to why I decided to throw this together. As I just mentioned, it came from a call I got from a client last week. So while this client had an issue specific to his migration of one CRM to another, it's an issue that's really pretty fundamental and something I often encounter in the world of data. So let me give you the who, what, where, when, why of this call. So, first, as to who it was, it's a business owner who I first started working with about 10 years ago when he called and asked for some work on his gold mine system. We've had a relationship ever since. I've done some custom programming for him on a project management tool that I wrote for him. But at the beginning of 2024, he decided he was finally ready to switch CRMs and wanted to move to Zoho One. So he chose to send an employee uh, that worked for him to a Zoho training session and take a formal class. And then my client self migrated, this employee self migrated their data from Goldmine to the Zoho One platform. So, what was the reason for his call? Well, he when he called me, I could tell somebody was on a phone in the background, and it turns out he was Skyping with another vendor, and this vendor was going to help him get his first email blast out of the new system. And my client realized that he did not migrate his record status field into Zoho. When the employee did this migration, they didn't include the record status field. And for him, what I'm talking about in terms of record status, you might call it something else in your world, it's the field he used to track whether a contact was a customer, prospect, vendor, etc. Right? So the employee that helped set it up is no longer with him, of course. And he called me to give his contractor some guidance on what to do. So where was I when I got this call? Well, I was in bed because when did I get this call? It was 7:28 in the morning, right? He called me because the vendor he was Skyping with is overseas, and that's when he had this work session planned, right? So it really brings up the question, why did I take the call if it was 7:28 a.m.? I was still in bed. He hasn't used my product in over a year. We talked once in the past year just to check in. But see, here's the thing. Once a client, always a client in my world. And that in itself is a breadcrumb in life. Next, secondly, here, if he's calling off hours, he probably needs something. So when the phone rings off hours and it's a number I recognize, unless I'm asleep, or which I was in this case, I just happened to hear the phone vibrate. But unless I'm asleep or otherwise preoccupied, I'm going to take the call because it's probably something important, or at least important to you, and we can schedule time if it can't be handled then, right? So I answer the phone for people I know no matter what the hour is, no matter what the day is. And lastly, which kind of brings up the point, this client knows me. Like I said, I've been working with them for over 10 years. And like I said, once a client, always a client. He probably has the same attitude towards his vendors. Once a vendor, always a vendor, or potential vendor again. And just like I answer the phone off hours, like I said, he knows me. He knows that I'm usually working by 6:30 a.m. In fact, when he called, he even apologized for calling early, but said, "I know you're usually working by now." And I said, "Usually," because I was half asleep still, and we both laughed. But he's right because I'm usually up by 5 and as soon as I have that first cup of coffee or while I'm drinking that first cup of coffee, I'm firing up the computer and I'm next to it all day. That's just the nature of the work I do. But to my client, I was a breadcrumb to him in that moment. So, what are breadcrumbs? Well, you know the adage about leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. We've all heard the story. Some kids go off in the woods and they're leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, right? So they don't get lost. Hunters will mark trees to make note of their path, right? So this is what I'm talking about both with data and in life, right? Marking your path. Let's focus on the data for a minute because that's why the client called, right? He called me because he forgot to transfer a field specific to a contact when he migrated from one CRM to another. But in the world of data, you need to mark your contacts with breadcrumbs, right? If you mark your contacts in your new system with breadcrumbs from your legacy system, then you can always go back and pull data from one system, the old system, to update the new system when you forget something. And in this case, I gave him some instructions on doing that, not knowing for sure whether he transferred the information he needed to, his legacy ID, but gave him the workarounds I'm about to talk about here as well. But the thing is every CRM system, ERP system, accounting system out there, they all have a unique identifier for the record, whether you see it or not. And sure, I've encountered systems that don't, or you can't get to it, and that's a problem. But if you're using something commercial, I can almost guarantee you that it has a unique identifier, not only for each contact, but for each record in that database. So each history item, each order, each everything has its own unique identifier, whether you see it or not. And it's extremely likely that those unique identifier fields can be exported. And like I said, there may be instances where you can't or can't through the interface, but there are often ways to get to them. So as I said before, this client used to use Goldmine, and in that world, the account no is the unique identifier for each contact. But each contact's made up of, history, pending items, plenty of other things, right? And each of those rows, each of those data elements has its own unique identifier, and that's called a rec ID. So these fields and their values are breadcrumbs. And they're elements that you should migrate out of your legacy system when you're going to a new system. So as long as the system allows you to create user-defined fields to store those elements, you should do that. And if it lets you do it at the object level, at each object level, like with a history item and you're migrating history, then transfer that rec ID because the account node is going to roll it up to the contact in the legacy system. But transfer that unique rec ID so you can tie that information together later if you've forgotten something. Now, let's hypothetically say you're too far down the road and you realize you didn't migrate those elements, or you're working with a system where it's truly not available. They just might, not be as unique as you think they are, but there are other breadcrumbs out there, right? There are other things in your system that you can use to match on. So, one of those, for example, is email address. That's always a good place to start. It's not always unique in every system as people think it is, but it's always a good place to start because email addresses usually are following individuals. Next, you have the individual's name, like a contact name, but contact names are not as unique, right? There's a lot of Bill Smiths in the world. So you might want to combine it with something else like the company, the address, some portion of the address, the phone number, etc. And I always have to point out customer numbers because I'm a big believer that in any system you have that stores any type of customer data, you should be tracking your customer number, even if it's not something native to it, right? Your customer data is the most important data you have. And you should be able to tie that together no matter what system it comes from if you have that need. But then you have these situations where you're also pulling in data from spreadsheets provided by a sales rep, right? You're getting a data feed from a business partner. You get leads from a trade show. The bottom line that these are things that probably don't always have unique identifiers. And it's very likely you might want to match against your current system or maybe exclude records from an import. Or subsequently, you're going to want to track the records from that import later. So you open up these things that you get from your business partners, your sales reps, et cetera, and you see there's no native record ID, there's no noticeable way to track or match. What do you do? Well, it's just like cooking. If you are making a recipe and it calls for breadcrumbs and you open up your pantry and see you don't have any, what do? You take some bread, dry it out in the oven, crumble it up, you make your own breadcrumbs. So if you have data to match, data to exclude, you use whatever fields you have access to. There's commercial matching software out there that'll help you with it. You can take time and write your own matching formulas. I do things like strip spaces, punctuation, conjunctions, special characters. You get to alphanumeric data and you can substring and concatenate your day away. But if this is data you want to track, like you're importing leads from a spreadsheet and 9 months, say from a trade show, and 9 months from now, you might want to know how many of those you've closed, right? You want to identify them. So at a minimum, you need things like a source field to tag them from the trade show. But don't just include the show, include the year. So if it's a National Association of Convenience Stores trade show in 2024, you code them with an AX 2024. Then next year you code them with an AX 2025, and next thing you know, you know how many you're getting from NAX, no matter what the year. So in addition to that, you might want to put a unique ID in so when they show up next time, you can match and exclude. But just numbering those leads isn't going to be unique enough. You might want to create a unique ID using combinations of the fields that I've already mentioned, things like email, phone number, contact name, and phone number, right? It's going to increase your ability to match. But the point is, sometimes you just have to make your own breadcrumbs, whether that data is internal or external, and in life. So that brings up the question, what about life? Everything I just said about data applies to life. But we'll make it a little businessy here. Every relationship we have out there is a breadcrumb. So think about the business relationships. Do the people you know burn bridges? Or do they have a once a client, always a client attitude? Once a vendor, always a vendor attitude? Once an employee, always a trusted resource attitude? But what are those life breadcrumbs about, right? They're about marking your path, just like you do with data. It's used to show where you've been, but it's also used to show your way back. So you really need to follow your own breadcrumbs in life, in business and in life. Think about it as networking, using the value of the relationships you already have with, think about people you've worked with before, how they can be a trusted resource for a project again, right? They're a breadcrumb to your past, but also to your future. And you have to remember that you can make your own, just like you might have to do with data sometime. You can do the same thing in life. And it doesn't require cold calling if you're in sales. You might be doing that anyhow, but you can join a business network. You can go volunteer for a new organization. There's adult intramural sports, join a kickball league, right? You can make your own breadcrumbs in life. But at the end of the day, and as I just said on the previous slide, your breadcrumbs are showing you where you've been. And ultimately, they're ties to your past, good or bad, but there's good in everything. But those crumbs are also a path. They have meaning in moving forward, not just in data, but in life. And that's your Joeism for the day. So, as you go out in the world today, take care of humanity, others, and then yourself. And remember that you're leaving breadcrumbs along the way. Remember those breadcrumbs are keys to your future, not just your past. It's one of the many ways you can give your choices a purpose bigger than yourself. I'll see you soon.